I am very, very thrilled that we can bring to you today Mr. Elliott Masie. And I know many of you know him and know his background, but let me share a little bit with those of you who don't. He's internationally known as a futurist, an analyst, a researcher, and an organizer of workforce learning, and also trending technology. He's the author and publisher of the Learning Trends newsletter that you can get access to via the internet. He's also a regular columnist in several publications, including the Chief Learning Officer magazine. He's the author of 12 books. He heads the Masie Center in New York, and his professional focus is corporate learning. So those are all the things that everyone tends to know about Mr. Masie, but I learned some things today that I didn't know that I found to be very fascinating, and he'll share a little bit about those with you today during his presentation. One is that he is on the CIA Board of Visitors. So Central Intelligence Agency knows him. He is helping them, and I'm glad of it. Secondly, he's a Broadway producer. He actually has one production that he'll mention today that's actually on Broadway right now and getting ready to do some other things and working with some great names that you would recognize. And then the most interesting thing is that he has developed this fascination with 3D printers. And so he now will be making things as well as a part of what he does. So without further ado, let me please, would you guys join me in welcoming Mr. Elliott Masie to the podium.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here. And what I'd like to do over the course of the time that we're together is to frame up a conversation. And from time to time, I'm going to have you engaged in the conversation. And maybe we'll ask them to shop or stop or the like along the way. But I'd like to have a conversation about learning and about what is happening in learning, what's changing in learning, what's not changing in learning, and take a little bit of a look at what its implications are for that. Now, I've made up a few PowerPoints because that sort of happens when you do a presentation, but there are probably two good things you'll know about the PowerPoints. One is that they're not very core to what I'm going to be talking about, okay? They're there, and I'm going to use a lot of pictures, and you'll see none with 3 bullets on a page, okay? Now, I'm not knocking anyone who does them, and I've been known to do them as well, but I've had some interesting interest in the cognitive memory of PowerPoint exposure. Meaning, when you see PowerPoints, what do you memorize about them along the way? And what's interesting is we're starting to see a lot of research that says very little. Okay? Now, I had an interesting phenomena with PowerPoint. Probably about 6-7 years ago, I was honored to be asked to be a keynote speaker for Wall Street Journal at a big conference called D. It's a digital conference, and there are some very, very big names there. And so, because I was a speaker, I got to have dinner with them. And sitting around the table were Bill Gates and his wife Melinda, and next to him was Steve Jobs, and over here on the other side was Steve Case, who had left AOL, and Walt Mossberg from the Wall Street Journal, and myself. And we just had this interesting conversation. I had known Bill Gates several times during his career and done some things with Microsoft. We got onto learning, and I was very honored. They said, you know, this is Elliott Masie. He sort of helped coin the term, or at least popularize the term e-learning, and he's been very involved in that field for a while. And Melinda Gates, Bill's wife, eyes light up, and she turns to me and she says, Elliott, you're the learning guy. What's the very best tool for learning? Now, every now and then you're in a moment where you have to make a do I talk truth to power situation. A little bit of background about Melinda. Before she started to date and then married Bill, she was working at Microsoft as a product manager, and she's the person that brought you the annoying paper clip in Microsoft Office, which, by the way, has some good things behind it, but it's got a little bit of a sandpaper effect on it. So I'm not, and I know what she wants me to say. She wants me to say PowerPoint. Okay, and I'm trying to figure out, do I get the word out of my mouth? Like, you know, and she says again, she said, so what do you think is the best tool for facilitating learning? and it's not coming out, you know. And so I take a deep breath and I realize, and by the way, she was eating macaroni salad at the time. And I said, Google. And one piece of noodle went like this and went flying. And so Bill got to her defense and said, but Elliott, why? What's wrong with PowerPoint? I said, you know, Bill, I know you've gone through a whole antitrust thing with the federal government, but personally I think that PowerPoint ought to be regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. He said, why? So if you're having a sleep problem, put a 30-slide stack on, and you'll probably be asleep halfway through that process. And there's nothing wrong with PowerPoint. I use it, I'm going to use it here. But what I don't think we've always thought through in learning is the relationship between the choices that we make, and do they help or hinder learning? And it'd be a really interesting thing, and we've all done PowerPoints and we know it's part of our lives, but at some point go up to somebody randomly and ask them about your third slide, you know, and the like. And almost in that, I mean, I get stopped by people who've heard of me or been in programs I've done or seen TV shows, and I get stopped, you know, in airports and other places, and nobody has ever referenced a slide that I've done. Now, they have referenced stories, and I'll try to tell a few stories along the way. But we're going to take a little bit of a look at that, because it's not that there's anything wrong with PowerPoint. We all use it. And there's not that there's anything wrong with any of the learning, training, and other performance tools that we use. But it's an important moment, I think, to ask our question, is it the best one? Is it how we optimally learn? What's happening with both changing generations and the like? So, what you're going to see is most of what I'm going to do is have a couple of different visuals up there. But if we just take a look at this for a moment, what's interesting if you ask the average employee, and by the way, I reordered the slides just to give you a lot of chaos, you know, because like any speaker, I think I sent it to you, what, like 3 weeks ago, and life changes, you know, so I woke up this morning, and then I came down here, so you got them all in order, so that's actually a second delight in that. But if you go to almost anyone in business, in any role, and you ask them about business today, they're going to tell you that there are all these words shooting out at them. All these words. You certainly know from being in the field related to accounting and finance that there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on innovation, on speed, on process, on change, and the like. I certainly know I sit on a couple corporate boards that in the whole area of regulatory compliance, it's an enormously interesting, important, and turbulent time with that. And in the light of that, we're going to have to figure out, how does one learn in this world? How does one learn in this process? Now, it's interesting being down here, but one of my good colleagues is Richard Riley. He was Secretary of Education. And what Richard would say, and I think it's one of the great quotes I heard out of a cabinet secretary in years, he said, when you learn something today, its half-life will usually be less than 4 years. That when we learn something today, the half-life of what we learn will usually be less than 4 years. He said the problem was they don't tell you what the half-life is. So you learn it, but you're not sure, will it be valid for a day, will it be valid for 10 years and the like. And so we are continually now in an intriguing process of learning and relearning, changing and updating and the like. Now, part of what is making that so interesting, and I know later on you're going to have a speaker talking about different generations, but whether we talk about it age-wise or whether we talk about it in terms of their ethnic background, whether we talk about it in terms of their professional background, is that our organizations, and I think it's what's wonderfully unique about the United States, is diversity. Because I travel all around the world, was recently in Hong Kong, China, India, down in South and Central America, and in almost every one of those countries you see a fairly homogeneous workplace. You go into the United States, you go into a room like this, and you immediately see increased diversity. And you see it in a variety of ways. And one of the interesting challenges and opportunities for us in diversity is to think about how we all learn differently. Okay? So let's even look up there. Okay? And let's look at one of the older people there. And I want to share with you, I'm 62, okay? I love being 62. I call myself an alpha boomer, okay? And it's interesting. Are any other like boomers in the room here? Okay, we got a couple folks. Now, what's really interesting is we are exciting and enormously frustrating. Okay, because first of all, to those of you who are just below us, we're not leaving. We're staying. I have a friend who's a boomer announced she'll be here 10 more years. All the people start to print up their resumes. So, you know, they were waiting to get their jobs. Well, but it's happening at levels even beyond that. So one of the members of our learning consortium is a very large fast food chain you might have heard of, and I won't mention them specifically here, but they do make hamburgers. I went to one of their stores to see how employees were being trained. And there was a 76-year-old first day on the job new hire. And she was learning how to make hamburgers. Put them down, there's an amount of time, it'll ring, you flip them over, and she was making them. She was being trained by a 19-year-old crew chief. 76-year-old woman, 19-year-old guy. And he's very pleased with her. He turns to look over here. She reaches into her pocket and takes out her own spice and puts it on the burger. And I watch her doing that, and I get this big smile, you know? And he turns to me, he said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Well, your burgers are fine, but I've always thought there wasn't a little bit of a kick to them. You can't come in here and make your own." "Look, son," she says to him, okay? She's 76, he's 19. She said, "Try it, they're quite good. You know, it'll catch on at the other restaurants." And he tries to take her through standard operating procedures. We don't enhance that. And he actually does taste it and thinks it's fairly good. He said, "Well, we should send it to headquarters," and the like. But we've got this interesting moment that increasingly we're doing learning at both ends. We're doing learning for people who just started their jobs, and we'll talk about them in a moment. But we're also doing learning for people who bring an enormous amount of life experience to that job. And how do we decide to recognize it? So I mentioned I'm on a board of directors, okay, several corporate boards. You probably know those funny words, Sarbanes-Oxley, okay? So I was on my first board when they said, "Okay, you've got to get Sarbanes-Oxley ready." And I didn't know if that was scrubbing or like what type of a treatment that would be. And sure enough, an accounting company came in, did a wonderful Sarbanes-Oxley training for me. And I took all these notes because I don't want to go to jail. And it was a very helpful experience. And I got done, and I was now Oxleyed. You know, I'm ready, you know. And then about 6 months later, my next board, they said, "Well, you know, we have to go through Sarbanes-Oxley." And I said, "Well, oh, I got my merit badge, and I'm looking for it, you know." And sure enough, they bring the same accounting firm in and the same trainer. So, "Oh, I don't have to go." "Oh, yes, you do." I said, "I've been through it once already." "It doesn't matter. You're going to have to go through it again," because there was no badge in that. Well, I went through it 4 different times during that process. Well, you can imagine what my level of attention was by the 4th time. But we increasingly have folks who are enormously experienced, and we have folks who are at a very different time and a very different point in their lives. Now we can take a look at one of the younger people here, okay? And I want to just share a little story about one of my new employees a few years ago. So I went out and I advertised for an employee, and it turns out this person heard about it before it hit the paper, came to my office, she was really impressive, and I hired her, okay? And then I said to her, "We're changing up how we're doing orientation." In the old days, I'd send her to the Masie Center orientation. How many of you do orientation programs at your organizations? Okay, and God bless you, but they are among the more forgettable experiences, okay? You know, because we know, like on the first day of orientation, we usually tell them about 20 different things, you know, including, I love it when they show the mission statement, you know. What does the person want to know their first day on the job? When will I get paid? How do I log on? Who do I go to lunch with? And we're showing a video of the CEO as a child saying, someday there'll be a global organization here. So I tell her we're not going to do that. You and I are going to do something generationally cool. We're going to start off and go to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee. We're going to talk about our culture, come back, we'll hang out in my office for about an hour or two. I'll go through the history of what we do, your role, what the Masie Center's about, a few of our different things, so you feel comfortable, and then you can start work. None of this normal orientation. She looks me straight in the eye. Do I have to? And I'm saying to myself, did I hear that right? She said, is that mandatory? Now I'm saying, did I sign her hiring form yet at that process? So I said, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? This is like CEO and you, like a couple hours. She goes, well, you're the e-learning guy. I was reading on the web all about you. Don't we just have you as like a set of short modules? Hold on. You'd like the digital Elliott rather than the real Elliott. She goes, yeah. I go, why? She goes, well, you're a lot like my dad. Well, now I knew I was in trouble. He tells stories. They just go on and on and on. And I said, yeah, but what's better about the video? She goes, well, you don't have a fast forward button. Then she recovers and realizes that I pay her bonus. And she says, plus which, a few of the things you say are going to be so important, I'll want to listen to them over and over and over again. So I knew I hired the right person in that sense. But it's not just age basis, okay? We actually have a variety of different ways in which we learn. And I would argue we also have a very good way of faking it when we're not learning but want to appear to learn. Okay, we're all very good at pretending to take notes, okay? You know how that is, a menu is written here, we circle things, and I'm not saying it's negative. I'm just saying that we have a variety of different ways in which we go through that process. Now, one of the things that makes it interesting is this. How many of you have eaten in a restaurant recently? Okay, almost everyone here. You'd be starving today probably if you didn't. And you probably saw boards like this in the restaurant. Now, have you noticed that almost nobody orders straight off the menu anymore? What they do is they come in and they go, so do you have the salad, but could I have it with an apple and a little bit of the cheese and the mozzarella, and then have a bit of feta and put the Caesar on the side? And none of us are shocked when we do this, because essentially what we've learned as a fairly affluent society is that we want to have it our way. We want to delete that which we don't need, include that which we want, avoid that which we are allergic to, and in fact, that's how many of us go to a restaurant. And I have friends who own restaurants, and they say the rarity now is a whole table and everyone orders just off the menu. They're always doing some degree of modification. Well, it's interesting because the same thing is starting to happen with learning. And I want to ask you to have a short little conversation at your table, okay? Just with the 1 or 5, 6 people who are around you. How do you think people are approaching learning in some of the same way? Whether it's officially or unofficially. How do you think people are personalizing learning themselves? So just turn to your neighbors for about 45 seconds. I'm from New York, so everything happens quickly there. So.
salt, the spice shaker story
Yeah.
is priceless.
Oh my God.
Okay, hello. So, just real quick, you're not shy. I heard you yelling shop and stop. What are some ways in which we would ideally personalize learning? Anyone? In the back. Right. Oh, and it's an enormous problem. Let me give you one, and I hope that I don't offend anyone here, but I think most e-learning is too easy. I think a lot of the e-learning that's done out there is too easy. Most people get a trophy for just logging on. And what's interesting, actually, is that if you go to particularly a group of younger people or adults who play video games, and you ask them what they want in a video game, nobody wants to pass the first time through. Everybody wants to have trouble getting to the second door, but we've actually built, particularly from a compliance point of view, we've built some things in which some people feel it's too easy. And then to your point, in some cases, it's like a mile too high to carry in that. So we might want to personalize how he says. Anything else? How else do you want to maybe personalize something? Go ahead. I saw your hand up there.
Different delivery methods.
Different delivery. So let's do a quick poll here. Let's say you needed to learn a new federal regulation that came out. Okay, regulation XXX. Okay. How many of you would want to go to a one-day instructor-led lecture interactive workshop on that? One-day workshop. How many of you would want to do that? Okay. How many of you would want to watch a series of videos on it that would last maybe half a day to a full day on that? Okay, how many of you would want to read the PDF and jump and then take the test to see if you got that? Okay, how many of you would want to talk to somebody who knew something about it till you thought that you got it during that process? And how many of you would just wait for the regulation to be revoked to learn it later on? Okay, and if at any time you want to vote quietly, just move your feet. I can kind of see them out there. The interesting thing is that we actually all have different styles of learning. Now, we've been doing some work on this. We've been looking at what do people ideally want to do as they learn. And I want to make the distinction between training and learning. Training is what headquarters can or must give you. Can or must give you. Okay? So I have a friend who's in charge of flight attendant training for Southwest Airlines. So they must give you the following thing that says, welcome, this is the seatbelt, here's how you click your seatbelt. Now, what percentage of Americans don't know how to put a seatbelt on at that point? But from a training point of view, it is specified in that sense. So very often we're training on something for which there is no learning requirement, but we're just doing that. And in many cases, we train on something for which there's no end knowledge result at the other side. I heard it all, but I don't know how to do that. So IT training was like that. You know, somebody would go through a week-long big ERP program, and then they call up the first day they get back, how do you log on? Because they went through an enormous training cycle, but they don't necessarily get it. Now, why is that? And we'll get back to this later. A tremendous amount of people don't want to learn till the moment of need or pain. A lot of people don't want to learn until the moment of need or pain. So anticipatory learning is much more difficult. But this is what we found. When we asked 100 people how do they want to learn, and I bet you're not that different. Here's what they want to learn. I want to learn the stuff that's new, important, monitored, and I'm likely to use in the near future. That's new, important, monitored, and I'm likely to use in the near future. I don't want to learn the stuff that I know already, that's not overly relevant, and that I probably won't learn in the future. I probably don't want to learn that which I can easily look up at the point when I want to do it. I want to learn it in a duration appropriate to the value that I'm in. I don't want to take a day-long program for something that I think is about 9 minutes of duration. I want to learn it at a time that's appropriate. I want to learn it in a style that I optimize in. I want to learn it either with or without other people based on how much of an introvert or an extrovert I am as a learner. I might want to learn it at work during the day, or I might want to learn it 11 o'clock at night on Sunday night. And I might want to learn it one time and get it, or I might want to go through it multiple times. Now, what's interesting, they're not any different than the people in this room, because I saw all around the room people shaking their head at different points. Now, can we afford to give everybody what they want? No. In a high compliance environment, can we do that? No. But I would argue, use me as an example, as a board member, you want to be in compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley. Teaching it to me the third time was hyper dumb. At some point, you wanted to say, what was it, you said it before, what was his performance? What was his competency? How ready is he to do that? And the like. And in fact, a lot of times when we're teaching people things, they know it already, and we've got to map the new stuff back to what they know already. Now, there are some uber trends that are happening there that I think we got to look at, because whether you get there soon or not, they're coming. And video is one of those trends. What's fascinating about the internet right now is a shift has occurred in about the last 2 years. About 2 years ago, when you went out on the internet, you very likely ended up on a page where you read something. When you made a search, whether it's of retail, whether it was of legal, whether it was of news, whether it was of sports, whether it was of entertainment or health, you ended up on a page to read. Now, there's a 62% chance that when you go to a web page, there will be a video on that page. In fact, if you go to some pages, it is primarily video. Because what they found is that, A, the page people want to be in the video mode, but from a consumption point of view, people are more likely to watch in many situations than read. So what we're starting to see outside of work is this shift to viewing, this shift to watching. And it's impacting in the world of learning. I have a friend who bought a $3,000 bicycle. Now, I still don't understand why anyone would spend $3,000 for a bicycle, but I honor the diversity of my friends. It was built around his shape. He went to a thing, he got like MRI'd, and they saw where his knees were. I mean, this was built for him. And it took like 9 weeks to build. And then he goes there, and he says the most logical thing, where's the manual? They said, there isn't one. Where's the manual? Go to this web page. We've got videos from other people that have this bicycle on how best to use it. And he was insulted. He just spent $3,000. He didn't get a manual with it. So what does he do? He goes home and he starts to see these web things. And they were short, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 9 minutes. He came back, he said, way better than the manual. What we're starting to see is that many individuals, when they're learning outside of work, are starting to want to go consume a piece of video. In fact, the highest rising use of video outside of work, other than pure entertainment, to watch a movie, is people that go to watch how something is done in order to learn how to do that. Now, what's intriguing is it's starting to come into work. What we're starting to see is that organizations that are leveraging the sort of YouTube effect are starting to see the radical rise of consumption of video internally. So we work with a number of very large organizations, from Intel to Walmart and others, and all across the commercial field now, we're starting to see folks realizing whether it's hyperly commercially produced or it's done as almost a home video using a webcam, that we're starting to see the increase in short segment video. Now, by the way, if the video lasts more than 11 minutes, the number of people who start it goes way down. If it lasts more than 11 minutes, the number of people who finish it goes way down. But if it's between 3 and 5 minutes, we start to see some enormously high levels of consumption. And by the way, this is true of really technical training. So you're going to become a pilot in a new version of that aircraft. Or it could be a very procedural element of how you're going to deal with a very complex business process. Now, am I suggesting that video is going to take over for everything? No. But here's the moment of this menu that we talked about before. Because increasingly, the person's going to say, where's the video? Increasingly, they're going to ask for where the video is. And let me just shut this off for a second and share with you something outside our field. Because I think what's really important, and I spend a lot of time with groups like you that are in highly regulated industries. So I'm with folks in the healthcare field. I obviously do work in the intelligence service. We do work with people who do Series 7 and other elements. And being in the highly regulated area means that we've got to be in compliance. We've got to figure out how we live up to standard. And everybody is on the same page of trying to avoid the Wall Street Journal article. The goal, I always turn to my accountant and say, your job is to keep me from not having a negative, I don't want to have a negative audit, and I don't want to have a Wall Street Journal story. So that's what they're doing. But it's important in these fields to sometimes reach outside the box to look at a changing element. I want to go outside the box to K through 12. How many of you currently have kids who are in school? Okay, if not, you probably have neighbors who have kids or kids who are older and the like. There is a radical conversational shift that is occurring there. One of my friends and colleagues is Sal Khan. You may have seen him on TV, Khan Academy. Sal was best way to describe him, he was a venture capital nerdy geek working in Wall Street and then working in the tech world, and Indian American. And one day he gets a really angry note from one of his relatives, or a panic note, to say, help, my daughter is getting an Indian F in trigonometry. Now you have to understand when an Indian F was probably a B+ or an A- at that point. Okay, but was enormously concerned that she was not succeeding. What can you do about that? Her teacher doesn't seem to be responding. Now, Sal didn't know much about trigonometry, but he went on and he read some stuff up, and there was a specific exercise she'd gotten wrong, so he made up a little 5-minute scratchy thing with just a stylus and a pen and talked through step by step what that trigonometry activity was. Sent it to his niece, okay? She not only liked it, but she got an A in that. Now, rather than get a thank you, his relative sent a list of 12 more modules for him to create. Now, he had a day job while he was doing it, so he went out and he did 12 more modules on that. And he started to get pretty good at it, you know. Now, low tech, no video, just his voice over it. Something good or bad happened. His niece put them up on YouTube. Pretty soon, 1,500 people had seen his trigonometry modules, okay? He started to get emails not just from the aunt, but from other parents around the country, okay? And they weren't limited to trigonometry. It ventured into algebra, geometry. Somebody asked him for physics. So he started to continue to build this. It was sort of a hobby of his. And along the way, Ann Doerr, wife of John Doerr, who's invested in Netscape and a lot of things, saw it, said, this is really cool. I'm going to give you $100,000 to really grow this as a not-for-profit. So suddenly he was up to 1 million people watching it. And then she turned to her friend Melinda Gates and said, let's really kick it up. And to put it this way, Sal Khan is the highest frequented site for learning in the world right now. And he's building out, I think he has like 14,000 modules. But an interesting thing started to happen along the way with Sal and on the side of Sal, which is that a number of secondary and elementary school teachers started to experiment, to say, let's look at what happens in school. I come in and I'm teaching from the whiteboard, from the side, I'm giving a lesson. Kids are asking a few questions. Then I send them home with homework. They do their homework there, and then they come back and we grade it and the like. What if we flipped it? And that actually became a phrase. I started to use it, and Sal started to use it, and a friend of mine, Dan Pink, started to use it, who wrote A Whole New Mind. What if we flipped school? So around the country, we had some teachers who started to do a flip, and here's what the flip was. Let's make a video of our lecture, either ourselves or use something like Sal's stuff. Let's give it to students as homework. So as homework, they watch the lecture, and then let's have them come into school and do their actual activity in class, working with each other. Do me a favor, just turn to your neighbors for a second. What do you think happened, and where do you think the resistance was when a couple teachers did a little bit of a flip in that process? So just turn to your neighbors for a second on that. Okay, let me stop here. First of all, how do you think the principals of those teachers felt about it? By the way, they're going to respond the same way some of your regulatory people are going to respond. That's not teaching. We hire you to teach. And now the kids are going home and they're doing it, and you're coming in and they're not hearing lectures, but they're working in groups and the like. But what do you think happened when the kids went home? Because the greatest fear the principals have is the kids would be by themselves when they get confused. Didn't happen that way. First of all, they found that a lot of the kids, particularly the junior high school boys, invited each other to their Xbox sessions and started to watch the stuff together. And a lot of the other kids did it online with, connecting to each other by IM or Live. So there was this whole level of watching it and then remediating each other through the process. Then they came in, and the teacher was much more involved in class in where the problems were. And the peer teaching went way up. So in 9 classes that were tracked for flipped learning, they had a radically increased pass rate, and they got through the content in 30 to 40% faster time. But it violated the curriculum of the school. It doesn't, if we really think about it, because they still took the same competency tests, they still got the same instruction. In fact, they got more activity in that process, and they had more access to the faculty member in that. And what happened is they gave the faculty member feedback to improve the video for the next class. So it was sort of self-improving in that process. The reason that I bring that up is that whether you drive it or not, you're going to watch an increasing use of video for instruction, for learning. And by the way, it's going to come across the whole field. Some of it will be done from paid vendors. Okay, so a for-profit excellent vendor, or it may come from an accounting firm, it may come from your association, and it will be good and it will be polished. And my one advice to you is make them shorter. I had Bill Clinton as a speaker at my conference last year. I had him for 1 hour and 31 minutes. And when he gave me permission to put his stuff up, I could have put it up as a 1 hour and 31 minute speech. I broke it down into 3-minute segments, and I've had hundreds of thousands of people watch it in that sense. People will watch an hour, but let them watch it in 20 segments, and actually let them resequence it, because part of this menu process is that we learn sequentially different. Now, I guess you're taping this, but hopefully my wife won't see it, okay? My wife and I are both wonderful learners, but we're in the exact opposite framework. You give me something to learn, the first thing I want to do is break it if I can. So if you gave me a device to operate, I would not read the manual. If I were my friend, I would get the bike, I would take a wheel off. I would see if I could switch the wheels, okay? I would actually break it. Later on, I would fix it. I talked to somebody else who did it, and the last thing I would do is read the manual. My wife puts it in a reverential area, worships it for a little while, reads everything about it, watches somebody else do it, and the last thing in the world she wants to do is break it. We actually have the same time to competency. We get to competency in the exact same time. Some people want to test if they know it first and then learn it. For some people, taking the pretest is demotivating. For other people, it's totally exciting. So one of our interesting dilemmas along the way may be, particularly as we go to more and more video, is that there are going to often be multiple sequences for this. So one group I was in had literally the same procedure done, one for accountants, one for engineers, one for salespeople. Same content, but it was actually framed differently to talk the language that we were talking in that process. So I would prepare for that. The second thing, whether you want to like it or not, that you're going to have to get used to, is the ever-increasing social and collaborative world that is out there. The ever-increasing social and collaborative world that is out there. Because things are different as people connect. I have a friend who's going through, are there any actuarials in the room here? Okay, good. I don't understand the process. It's a 7-year torture process they're going through to become an actuary. I mean, the amount of testing that they have is beyond anything. It's more than an astronaut to become an actuarial. And it doesn't often make sense in the end, but that's their field, okay? But what was really interesting in the last 2 years, a social network has formed of people going through the actuarial training process. And so now, they're not only taking these regular, very rigorous exams, but they're collaborating with each other. And whether we like it or not, we are watching and seeing a fairly significant increase in the social and collaborative dimensions of learning. Now this is a very elaborate one, and you've got a copy of it in your thing, so I'm not going to try to explain it from far. But I want to beat up one element of what the social collaborative piece is and then come back to it. I'm not suggesting that what social learning means is people that can go out to Facebook to understand that, that regulatory or compliance or accounting process. In fact, they might, but that's a very, 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 very small piece of what collaboration is going to be about. What we find collaboration starts to be about is a couple of things. One, when I learn something new, I generally want to explain what I've learned while I'm learning it to somebody else as the process of getting it. So once again, my dear wife sits, we have our sofas in our living room, okay, and I'm always doing 3 things at once. So I was taking a course online from Stanford in robotic language. She's over here watching TV, reading something else. I would regularly stop and tell her a really cool language command that I learned. Now, in the early stage of our marriage, she would say, I don't know anything about it, why are you telling me that? Now she knows that her role is to say, that's fascinating, Elliott, tell me more. Because it's really not about her, it's about me. Part of the what we call cognitive rehearsal process is as we learn something new, explaining it to somebody else helps us understand it, remember it, filter it, and get it right. Now here's what I worry about. As we do more and more online learning where we're away from other people, we often lose that element of doing that. So one of the things that we're seeing more and more is this concept of the learner as teacher. How do I learn it and then teach it to you? Or how do I learn it and then explain it? Another piece that's interesting, at my conference this year, I have Colin Powell, General Powell, coming as one of my keynote speakers, and we were negotiating what he would talk about. And I asked him to talk about something which I think he says really intriguingly, which is that when we learn something, there are 3 levels of knowledge that they need. They need headquarters knowledge, meaning what comes out of the headquarters. They want to know the standard operating procedure. They want to have context, which is the story behind it. They want to know, why was that there? What did it replace? How is it different? And then they want to know a third thing called field truth or field stories. They actually want to know what people in an office like mine do with that headquarters content. And what he found in his experience as a soldier, as a general, as a leader of our military, and then in the State Department, was that if they don't have all 3, they don't get it. That the learner actually needs all 3 levels. They need to have what comes from headquarters, they need to have the story behind that, and they need to have access to field truth. They need to understand what people in the field are doing. Now the problem is one person can't deliver all 3. As the instructor, I can't deliver all 3. So I either have to convey stories, I get it from the students, I get it online, or increasingly, they get it themselves. So very often, you go to a class, people hear it very rigorously here, and they go out and they get a cup of coffee, and over the coffee, they get the field truth. Don't worry about that. You can take care of it easy by doing X, Y, and Z. Not contradicting it, but adding that field truth level of it. What I would warn you, encourage you, and have you think about is increasingly our learners are going to be socially and collaboratively connected to other sources of knowledge other than you. And sometimes that's really good, positive knowledge, and sometimes it's going to be confusing knowledge. To give you a sad example of this, one of the groups that I'm giving an award to this year is the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, doing really state-of-the-art work on what they call making cancer history, getting rid of at least cancer death when they can, and even the disease itself. When they give a person, God forbid, they give a person the news that they have cancer, they talk to that person half an hour. They know that almost everything they say during that half an hour, the person will have forgotten or it's got confused in about a day. Because at that time they're under stress and the like. But if they talk to that person 2 or 3 days later, guess what? They've probably gone on to 3 different websites, joined 2 communities, found people who have been survivors or not survivors, found some really good information, and probably found some stuff that's really dangerous to think about or follow in that process. But the cat's out of the box. They no longer admit that they can control the knowledge sphere that the person, and you're in the same situation. The people who are learning from you on your content are hooked into multiple knowledge cycles, internal in the company or in the agency, external in their field, online, and we need to accept and at least deal with how do we sort that all out. Now, I love it because I actually think the socially connected learner learns faster. But it's harder for me as an instructor to have a learner that is that. So the physician, when they're coming to see you and you've got 16 pages of internet printouts, mutters, oh no, there goes my time limit with this person. Because now you are a more aggressive learner in that situation. But the other thing that I think we need to look at, if you look at the bottom there, if I had to give you a book to read, not that I can give you a homework assignment, but a homework suggestion, go read a book called Quiet by Susan Cain. It's called Quiet, the Power of Introverts. What Susan, and by the way, if you don't want to read it, there's a wonderful 10-minute TED video by her. You see, so we could do the big book or we could do the, and actually if you go to my site, I've got a link to her TED video. What Susan would argue is 20 to 25% of the people in this room are introverts. That when you go into your field, the people who you are training, certifying, are introverts. meaning that their natural tendency is not necessarily to socially collaborate at work. It doesn't mean they're unfriendly. They're just introverts. They're coming in to do their work. They might be enormously social about a hobby, but they're not necessarily social about that work. Our problem is we're building more and more of these social environments. And we're getting surprised. So for instance, anybody remember, go back to some people who look closer to mine. Remember Lotus Notes when it came? My friend Masie invented Lotus Notes. It was awesome. I remember PwC, Ernst & Young, and others. The early implementers, $275 a seat. We were going to have literally ongoing collaboration from our desktop. In fact, they said, with Lotus Notes, training will go away because people will learn it from their groups. Lotus Notes didn't work. It was the most expensive email package ever put out there. Why? Because technology doesn't yield change behavior in that sense. That technology does not yield change behavior. It takes time. We're now continuously, how many of you have SharePoint in your office? Okay? Microsoft does SharePoint, bless their hearts. Okay, I'm not beating up on them because of PowerPoint too. But SharePoint is the most universally abandoned site in the universe. I mean, it is a digital ghost town. People say, I want to set up a community of practice of people who are doing this kind of an audit. Come join and get together with your colleagues in the community of practice. And people go the first time. Some go back the second time. Just a few go back the third time. Let's go forward 2 months. Who's hanging out in the community? The tired, the annoyed, the ready to depart, about to retire, sarcastic, and often marginally competent people. The high performers are off doing other things during that process. So there was an interesting example where the concept worked really well, but the behavior wasn't there. It is changing. You happen to know, whether it's you or your kids, that they are more socially connected. So I posted this morning on my website that I was going to be coming here to give this speech because, you know, I got a couple thousand people who are following me, okay? And so just as I was going on, I get this note here, okay? And it's from, let it load up here. Okay, here it goes. So I got a note, and it came in from Dan Bielenberg at Accenture, okay, asking about continual program evaluation along the way. So he's sending me notes to find out while I'm here, okay? So he says, are you going to mention something about continuing education credits and how training hours may not be the right metric? I'm dying to hear, let's talk tonight. Okay, so he's a senior learning manager at Accenture, and he's intervening in my day here and the like. And by the way, more people are responding to him now. So we've got a side thing going here on Facebook. But what I'm getting at is that is increasingly going to be the future. Can you control it? No. Am I suggesting you give everybody a SharePoint site to hang out with afterwards? No. But increasingly, learning is going to have a social dimension with it. And I actually believe that one of the interesting things in honoring the introverts is to also realize that teams need to become learning groups themselves. I think too often we register individuals in learning, and we ought to register teams. Because essentially, when we start to look at it, teams have collective knowledge. Now, it kind of goes to this slide. How many of you use the internet ever? Okay, from time to time. So I'm going to ask you a question. Turn to your neighbor at your table. How do you think the way we memorize has changed as more information is online, either on the internet or on internal intranets? So just turn to your neighbors for a second. How do you think that's changed or evolved? Okay, let me stop you here. How many of you think we're memorizing differently now that some of the knowledge is online? How many think we're memorizing less? Memorizing more? Okay. Once again, wonderful little scholar you can go online. She had a great interview on PBS. Betsy Sparrow. Recently, she's in her, I think, her late 20s, recently did her doctorate up at Harvard and MIT and is now a professor at Columbia. She has done some research on something she calls transactive memory. And that's why I use this graphic, or we can make it a little bit more generic there. What it basically says is if I know that what you're teaching me is online and easily accessible, and I saw some of you fondling your mobile devices as we were having this conversation, okay? So easily accessible here, I may learn it differently. She would say that in transactive memory, I may just learn how to get to it, not what it is. So, if you were going to be going to Tokyo, would you look up what the exchange rate is, or would you want to know how to find it when you got there? Okay, I might do either. I might do both. But once I know that the exchange rate is there, I probably don't memorize it. And what we're seeing now is this growth of transactive memory, in which the learner is making a decision: do I put it into deep memory, or do I just familiarize myself with it and rely on an at-the-moment lookup in that process? Now, there's nothing new about this, okay? Betsy would suggest, she's from New York City, that her husband is her transactive memory source for sports stories. She said she and her husband can go out and she can tell the best sports story. She doesn't need to know any of the details because her husband finishes it all. She'll say, for instance, we've got that brand new guy and he's a quarterback and he prays a lot, and you know, and her husband will supply the team and the player and the like in that. She said, but she's totally screwed if she tries to have a sports story without her husband nearby. Okay, she doesn't have the transactive memory that's there. But what she's finding, and they've done work at both the K-12 level, the college level, and I'm going to do some similar work at our level, is increasingly learners, as they go to learn something, are tagging it with its transactive code. Meaning, is it online and easily accessible? It might not be if it's behind 3 firewalls and I can't get to it and the like, but I'm doing a field audit, so now what do? I remember once I got a home audit from the IRS and I had to help the guy set up there, you know. And it was really, I gave him all sorts of cool ways to get at the stuff he needed from my home in that. He said, you should come with me to the other audits. You know, I said, that's not my job really. But what's interesting is more and more we are going to be dealing with transactive memory. Now, once that happens, we need to change how we teach. Because the learner is getting, let's say they're getting 130 concepts from you, or 92 different elements, they're sorting them. So for instance, in American high schools today, what do you think the number one question that kids ask their teachers? Will it be on the test? Will it be on, I wish it was, explain that in deeper detail. Contextualize against geographic history, you know. Give me a work example of it. It's not. The kids are sorting by transactive memory requirements. They're basically saying, do I need to memorize it? Do I need to memorize it and forget it the day after the final exam? So how many of you studied logarithms? It's really good. I haven't used a log in decades. I know it's there somewhere. I have a broad conceptual understanding, but in fact, what we need to start to think about is how do we stack the knowledge for our employees. And I would argue that increasingly, I want to give them the content that they need to learn in ways in which they can get at it modestly, easily. And in fact, get at it at the moment of need, the moment of change, and then make sure that they also build a mental framework. Because what worries me, if that person doesn't look up the exchange rate for Japan, they can't think about what their budget is. So I want them to have a mental framework of that, but there's only so much detail that they're going to actually memorize. And I would argue that this is a level of instructional design that we're not doing that well. We generally are good at looking at the end competency, the content that we cover there, the activities to get there, but we're not often helping a learner stack and divide the process. Now, there's another phenomenon. When you see this picture here, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you see these two characters up there? Do you see lecture going on? Is that a lecture? Well, what do you hear? Well, what do you see? Anyone have a word that might be described? Fun? And what's maybe he telling her? What was that?
A story.
Now, I would argue that the best teaching in the world, whether it's about nuclear physics compliance or whether it's about human-to-human delegation, is storytelling. Is storytelling. A great teacher is a storyteller. I had the opportunity to be with Captain Sully Sullenberger, the guy who landed the plane, okay? And he landed in 209 seconds from birds to water. And he tells a wonderful story how at that moment in that cockpit, he and his co-pilot, there were 75 years of flying experience in that cockpit. And in those 205 seconds, they went through 3 checklists together. And in between the steps, we're innovating because nobody had ever successfully landed a plane on water. But hearing him tell that story allowed me to memorize it, allowed me to understand it. Now, I'm not suggesting that the story needs to be aha, that it needs to be funny or the like, but that in fact, if we're going to put a person in a room rather than a video, okay, so if I bring you in to teach, or you in to teach, or you in to teach, bluntly, you could be replaced easily by a video. What you can do in the room that's a bit different is you can provide a more personal level of story, and you can provide interaction with people as they make that story relevant to what they know or they don't know. And I would argue that much of what we want to do in the world of learning is harness storytelling. A number of the military organizations, the Army War College, the Air Force War College, and the Navy War College, are now adding storytelling to senior management training. Because at the end of the day, in large measure, part of what we are building when we are doing training is we're building a story. I'll give you an interesting example. So for the early part of my career, I ran a Train the Technical Trainer workshop, a 2-day workshop that I did for 130,000 people around the world. I was one of these crazy traveling trainers, you know, go teach, fly, teach again. And I told a story, I tell lots of stories, but I told a story at the beginning of this about, at that point my mom was a bit younger. She was, I think she was in her 70s at the time, or maybe early 80s, and I forced her onto the internet for email. My mother did not want to go on the internet, okay? But I realized I couldn't afford to have my mother not connected in that world. So I flew down to Miami where she was, where many Jewish grandmothers go to retire in Miami, forced myself into her apartment, installed web TV, okay, had her email account, and then we went to eat, because in our family, even when bad news happens, you celebrate with some food along the way. And when I came back, I thought I was going to have a very personal moment with my mother and me. This would be intimate, like son teaching mother. You know, this was the reverse of her teaching me language growing up. But in her building with all of these retired grandmothers, they all had keys to each other's apartment, I guess to check if one had died at night or something like that. But they were always going to each other's apartments. So the word got out that she was the first woman in the building to get internet. And when he came back, there were 9 of the grandmothers on the couch across ready to watch us. And they were small, so they kind of all fit on the couch, you know. And I had brought handouts for my mom to explain cloud, that the email was in the cloud, and I had my brother's kids send her an email to be ready, and I'm explaining cloud. And over at the end was this 82-year-old red-haired woman named Sadie who yelled, "Cut the crap!" And what? Cut the crap, kid. Why are you showing us all this tech stuff? This is the internet, right? Yeah. Show us the men. Now, if ever I were challenged ethically, it was at that moment. Like, okay, I didn't want to hear that. I didn't know what she meant. It was show them pictures of really attractive 80-year-old guy. I mean, I didn't know how to respond, and well, I made my way through that. But I told that story. It was literally shorter than what I had just told you right now. 15 years later, I can get to an airport and somebody will come up and say, "Elliott, remember I was in your class? Show me the men." They remember the language, they remember the words, because one of the things that's interesting about us as a species is that one of our most native basic ways we learn is through storytelling. Now here's my challenge. A lot of instructional design steals the stories out of the content. Steals the stories out of the content. Which is why Colin Powell said, put the stories back in. Give them the standard operating procedure, but include the stories. And if you can include stories from multiple perspectives, even from multiple people, it becomes interesting. So what I'm now doing when I'm teaching a program is I might do a lecture like this and say, you know what, bringing in by Skype for 5 minutes, let me bring Dan from Deloitte over here who can share with what his experience was. And I'll bring Dan for 5 minutes in to tell a field story in that case. And I would argue that part of what we need to start to realize is storytelling is going to be an increasingly important dimension of what we do. Now, how many of you have devices with you here? How many of you have at least one digital device? How many of you have 2 digital devices? Okay, yeah, me too. 3, okay. Oh, this is getting really dangerous. We're going to have to meet on the side before. Any 4 device people in the room? Oh, very impressive. Okay. We all have devices. You know, I got my phone, and I'm embarrassed to say it's really tough. I mean, somebody on the plane yelled at me and said I wasn't a full boy because I didn't have my 5 with me yet, you know, and it's coming in 2 days. But but I got my smartphone, I got my tablet and the like. But the real interesting question is, what role will these have in learning? Now, let me be pretty blunt, because I'm a big fan and I'm also a modest skeptic, okay? We haven't figured out yet what tablets and mobile will really do for learning. We haven't. Right now, most tablets are being used as thin, portable laptops. Most tablets are being used as thin, portable laptops. And for all the buzz you read about mobile learning, there's almost none of it really happening. There are people that are learning using mobile devices, but they're not doing mobile learning. So in other words, if I go to book a restaurant on my device, that really wasn't mobile restauranting. I just happened to use that tablet versus my laptop in that sense. But I would strap your belts on, because there are 3 things that are coming that I would look at, because I think they are going to be provocative. One is going to increasingly be what the e-book becomes. The e-book. Now, how many of you have bought an e-book from Kindle or Amazon and the like? And I do too. In fact, it's my default right now. But most of the e-books that you buy are just basically digital full equivalents of the book. And by and large, less than 1/1000th of 1% use any of the added features on it. But get ready. I was with some of my colleagues from Adobe last week, and we started to imagine, what if the e-book really took shape and had more than just a book in it? What if it was a book that allowed me to take my competency exam in real time? What if it was an ability for me to highlight something I didn't understand and then get answers back to that on the side? What if it were a way in which it integrated some social knowledge? And what if the book continued to be a performance support tool for me? Now, does it exist today? Nope, it does not. You had mentioned I'm a theater producer. So I invest in some theater, and one of the productions that we just produced Godspell on Broadway, and now we're producing a new show. In fact, I will fly to San Diego later this week, called Allegiance, starring George Takei from Star Trek and Lea Salonga from Miss Saigon. And George just published his first ever e-book. But all it is right now is a book. It's the same that'll be in the print. But I'm flying out to California to talk to George about what could his e-book look like. And he's got images that it has sort of animations of him from being on the Star Trek, that it would have a kind of a knowledge history of what Japanese Americans experienced through World War II and beyond. In other words, he is getting ready as a 76-year-old author to convert a book into something that's a more dynamic learning tool. Can he buy an easy format for it? Doesn't exist yet. But be prepared. It's coming. How fast is it coming? Probably 2 to 6 years. So I'm not saying stop everything and prepare for that, but I think about what the e-book in your field will look like. The second, oh, by the way, the backstop of it, 12 years ago I had a conversation with the then commissioner of the IRS about a real-time online self-auditing tax form, where you would literally, as you fill it out, it would turn the block from green to yellow to red based on data at hand, whether that was a bad entry or not, you know. And I actually thought that would be kind of an interesting phenomena, but it was way ahead of its time in that sense. But we could imagine that we would have in an e-book an ability to build simulations into it. The second thing that's going to happen that I think is going to be intriguing is that as we look more and more at mobile devices, they're going to become, they're going to use what the mobile device has, which is location and communication in that. So if, you were talking before about having been at the Salesforce conference there, if it knows where I am, suddenly I get data based on where I am. If it knows what client I'm with, I get data with that. If it tells me who's available if I have a short question, and who has some time to answer that question. So we're going to start to see devices becoming more, if you will, social collaborative devices. And then the third piece, which you should put out 4 to 5 years in the future, is going to be gesture and haptic control, which means that right now we still are overly focused on typing. And in fact, our voice recognition level is getting really, really good. Really good. Better than I think you're even aware of. But gesture-based is getting even better. So we're experimenting in my office. So my monitor in my office went from being a 21-inch monitor to I have a 70-inch plasma touch gesture-based monitor in my office. And it's not just because I'm 62. I have very good vision, okay? But when my staff comes in, I go like this and documents go flying across. And but we are actually experimenting with what would it be like if you and I were gonna go through and look at a spreadsheet, for us to both be able to be on the spreadsheet and moving boxes together and literally haptically moving the data. And I find as a board member now, when I go to a board meeting, I never want printouts. This drives some of the accountants crazy. I don't want to see the printout. I actually want the dynamic drill down spreadsheet because I want to see what the number is, and then I want to go, you know, multiple levels of detail. I don't want to change it, but I want to be able to pivot table it, explore it, and the like. And you're going to start to see more and more of our devices being, if you will, gesture-based and collaborative. So you and I together on different devices could drive a shared spreadsheet up there. The final element about the tablet that I want you to consider is what Megan is doing here. So just turn to your neighbor for 30 seconds. What do you see one of my former associates doing with her tablet? How is she using her tablet on that screen? So just take a second on that. Okay, so what's Megan using her tablet to do? What? Research? Use the phrase second screen. She's using it as a second screen. Now, I know I keep coming back to my wife and I, but we do that. In our living room, we have 2 tablets there. We are in real time all evening long as we watch TV, second screening. So we'll watch a movie and my wife will say, who is that guy? Okay, and we'll go and we'll see who that guy is. We'll be watching some news and we'll be doing second screening. Now, what's really interesting is people are doing it at work. They're using it as second screens. Now, it was fascinating. Do you remember when tablets came out, when the first tablet came out? The IT managers were in a bit of a bind, probably in your company as well. They came out, and Steve Jobs, bless his heart, hated enterprise computing, okay? He went out of his way to make these difficult to use in the enterprise, from single source logon to evaporative logons and stuff like that. So they came out, and literally the next day, 10 or 12 people came in and said, can I get on Exchange? Can I put it on? And he had to say, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. And then about a week later, the CEO came in and said, hey, my cousin gave me one. Put Exchange on it. It was, and that's when the IT manager could lift his own from out under the table and show that he had it. But what we are seeing increasingly is that these are, in good and bad, second screens. So firewalls really don't exist anymore. I watch it, In our system, we're not allowed to get to X. I understand that, so I'll just use my tablet to get to that. I'll use my tablet to get to that. And that, in fact, what a lot of folks are starting to do is look at how do we build a second screen in from an instructional point of view. So literally right now there's some work going on in Paramount that you could be watching a movie at home and your tablet would be linked to the movie for real-time second screen information as you go there. If you want a wonderful one, when you watch the Super Bowl next year, you'll be able to, if you have a webcam at home, have your friends from around the country around the side of the Super Bowl in live video chatting with you, cheering or analyzing the commercials together. But second screens are new, but they are also going to be, I think, provocative elements of that. Now, I'm going to take a few questions in a moment, but I want to try to pull together what I've said and get a few questions from you. So the conversation is instructional design dead? Okay? And I'm an instructional designer, so I know everything about instructional design that you learn in a course. Sequencing, scope, how to set something up, what good assessment is, all of that different element. So the question is instructional design alive or dead? And my guess in this room, let me vote. How many of you think it's alive? How many of you think it's a little dead, maybe? Okay. How many of you think it needs a little bit of life support to go to next? Okay. And how many of you aren't sure in that sense? Well, I'm actually believing that it's actually alive, but that we need to change what we do from instructional design to learning design. And here's the difference. Instructional design is what you and I deliver from the stage as speakers. Learning design is what they do as learners to include what we do, but what they do on their own. So learning design recognizes that they might flip. They might go social. It recognizes, I know it's really tough. In some situations, they know it already. Please, God, let them test out on proficiency rather than re-instruct them if we can. In some cases, somebody wants to really get a tough challenge. Don't give me level 1 assessment, give me level 3. I want to bleed during that assessment. Give that opportunity to do that. For some people, they want compression. So how many of you go to webinars? Okay, whether you like it or not, you probably go. Up by 41% this year, webinars. Now, why do companies love webinars? Cheap, no travel, fast, less disruption of work. What do most employees think about webinars? Boring and much too long for the content. It's an hour long when it's 7 minutes. I teach lots of webinars. I get bored sometimes in the middle of one. I taught a webinar for Sun Microsystems that had 2,000 people on it. It was an hour long. About minute 27, I got really bored. I sent my assistant an email in the middle of the webinar that I was, and she comes to my glass door and with a sign said, "You're teaching." And I wrote back, "I'm bored." And I was teaching it. I told the story before about one employee who was working at home and there was nothing, she needed to take X number of webinars to qualify. Nowhere did it say she had to take them separately. She logged 3 laptops on and took them at the same time. And she completed all 3, you know. But part of what we need to think about is not about causing revolution. I am not a revolutionary. What I am is an evolutionary. And I think we have to think about what I call affordances. The technologies, but more importantly, the changing population needs some different affordances. They need to think about learning differently. And I believe we can do it and still maintain compliance, standard operating procedure, accountability, stay off the Wall Street Journal page, and the like. So I would advocate learning design. And learning design means you're not just focused at the instruction, but you're also enabling, permissioning, and then holding accountable the learning processes that people may do, including at times that they don't need as much or maybe any of your instruction, as long as they can validate that they have that end result. Will this be disruptive for training providers? You bet. Okay. Will this be disruptive for regulators? Probably. But it's also a matter of how do we make sure that we get to the highest level of competency and the highest level of performance. So I'm going to wrap up with a slide at the end, but I wanted to just pause here and take any questions that you might have. And it could be about what I said or stock tips or the like. They're coming to you with a microphone. So.
Professors are talking about a highest increase in cheating that they've ever seen.
Yeah.
And they call the students on it and they go, "Yeah, that's how I get the work done."
Yeah.
So on webinars and the distance learning stuff, how are we going to make sure people aren't just getting their tickets punched? You keep talking about the e-learners,
yeah,
but a lot of them aren't so interested in learning as just getting their ticket punched and move on to the next task.
I would argue where I think it comes from, and you're right, it is a problem, is the depersonalization of learning. The depersonalization of learning. So let me give you an example. If I go in and I say I need to show competency, and I'm going to go through a process. I'm going to start with a pretest, see it out. Based on that, you're going to give me the modules I need to have. You're going to build in a time for me to talk to a senior mentor or somebody on that issue. Suddenly somebody takes that process significantly more seriously than just send me through 5 modules in that process. I also think we have to make sure that the difficulty is greater. Because I actually think the hardest thing in the world as adults is to learn something that we sort of already know that we don't think we'll need to know. And so I encourage you to read some of the work that Paul G. did. He's a professor at University of Arizona, where he says most people learn through a process of structured acquisition with occasional failure and end up at recovery and competence. So Paul G.'s work is interesting, and the work done by Conrad Gottfredson on performance support, which says more of what we need to learn should be geared towards learning it at that moment of need in a way that validates kind of what we have already in that. Other questions, reactions? We got Mike will come to you.
My question is, you mentioned SharePoint not being an effective space for collaborative learning. What are some forums that you do like? Because I think that's a challenge to find.
There's nothing natively wrong with SharePoint. You know, SharePoint is a little bit like a whiteboard or Microsoft Word. It's an empty tool waiting to be filled. Our problem is a lot of organizations, minimally built it out. So it hasn't been that inviting. But more importantly, they forgot what they know about community. Okay? So let's say, I don't know if you come from a family with a lot of people, let's say you did, and you decided to have a cousins reunion. Okay? All the cousins were going to come together and go up to Nashville for a long weekend. Inviting them is easy. Having that be a success requires two roles, a mayor and a gardener. The mayor is the person who makes sure that that weekend works by structuring it, motivating it, making sure people getting there on time. And the gardener is unfortunately the person who deals with out-of-the-box behavior. You know, so cousin Mo is always a problem there, okay? And if people know Mo is coming, they might not come. So we're going to have to contain Mo over there, okay? We're going to have to deal with Mo differently. So it's not what was flagging technologically with SharePoint. By the way, Lotus Notes was perfect. So I went to Antarctica with Reimagining around it. So now, are there other tools out there? We're seeing people use SameTime, Jive, Google is coming. But you know, they're not natively 1,000% better, but often because of the fact that they're a little bit of an outlier, people are doing more current design. A lot of people build SharePoint communities and think people will automatically come there and join them. And most people aren't lonely. Most people don't come to work because they're lonely. They come to work because they want to perform and they want to have some community around them. But a lot of communities aren't sustainable. Where they sustain is if there's a shared outcome. So for those people going through Series 7, one of my colleagues, her husband's going through Series 7. He's in an incredible study community of people going through Series 7. You know, I think there are a lot of places, but we've got to make them efficient, short, and the crazy thing, sometimes if it's not proprietary, we might not build our own environment, but put it into a different environment. And I'm not saying it should just be a group in Facebook, but it could be as part of something else that already exists. Because after a while, I only want to be a member of so many teams. I don't want to yet be in another team along the way. Another question? Going once. Oh, then I have 3 extra minutes for stock tips. Okay, okay. Well, let me give you just a couple of interesting ones, and then we'll close out here. Number one, let's not forget the role that coaching and mentoring plays in training. What's fascinating is if you ask somebody how they got good at something. So let's say we did somebody, I have a friend who is an absolutely exquisite M&A specialist, really good at doing an analysis for M&A of what the real asset value is like. And I sold a couple companies and they worked with me in that process. If you asked him, how did he get to be good? He never talks about the course he went to. Never mentions the course. And he went to some great courses. He inevitably talks about the 2 or 3 mentors he had who really taught him what he knows how to do. And I would suggest that learning often does either require or gets accelerated with mentoring. Now we've got this new era, which is micro-mentoring or nano-mentoring. So we did some work with Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers has moved almost, not entirely, but significantly from a store-based program to an online program. I'm in an executive MBA program as a faculty member. We hardly ever meet with the learners, but I do 15-minute deep mentoring sessions with them by phone, by Skype, and online. So I actually think there is a role, and what I don't mean by coaching, we're going to talk about did their mother treat them well. But I'm really talking about you learn something new and then you go to do it, and that's their moment of confusion. And having 5-10 minutes with somebody who understands it is where a lot of it starts to make sense. Because we know a lot of things in the classroom that when we go to do it in the field, we don't transfer. And you know, Malcolm Knowles, the godfather of adult education, said real learning happens when we actually go to do it. But by then, our instructor has evaporated. So how do we have them not evaporate in that process? I think if I look at some of the things I would keep in mind as well, it is that we're also going to see, I think, roles that are going to be different. I mentioned earlier that I'm an alpha boomer, and I know your speaker this afternoon is going to talk about some different generations. I think there's a role for us to view that people won't necessarily retire, but they don't have to be at the heads of their organizations. And there's an enormous role for us to leverage people who have a lot of experience but want to continue to work, whether it's in full-time, part-time, or contract role, And I think there's an enormous opportunity for that. I want to defend Facebook for 30 seconds, okay? And I know everybody has seen their stock price go up and down. I would argue from somebody who has worked with them and been at their other companies, if you saw Apple at the beginning of Apple when they went public, you never would have guessed it would be $700 a share, okay? A lot of what you're seeing in places like Facebook are really groups that are going significantly out of the box in that. And a lot of what Wall Street does is look at something that has a comfort zone, and they are uniquely and by program uncomfortable. But they have only succeeded to the extent to which they stay uncomfortable in that process. And so when you look at a lot of the tech communities out there, you're going to see a lot of them being enormously volatile at the stock market, because some of the greatest innovation is occurring in unusual ways. And I'm going to end with what you had said. I have a hobby lately, and that is I try to collect some interesting technology. I've been experimenting with 3D printers. Now, if you have a boy or a girl in your family, if you are who loves technology, this would be a great Christmas present to buy them, okay? It starts at $1,200, but I have another one that's $4,000. And what it allows me to do, it's a printer that instead of printing paper, makes objects. So one of them actually has a long spool of plastic, and it melts the plastic, and there's a 3D robotic platform, and I can build things. Now, so far I've mainly built whistles. I built a screw to go into an eyeglass. So literally a friend didn't have an eyeglass thing. I actually printed that eyeglass. But it's being used now in a variety of ways for car parts are no longer available. Go print your car part. A friend of mine is a physician in Boston, is using it to make pieces to go into the body. So think about the construction of elements that are there. And there's a new one that we just got. We haven't tried it yet. It just arrived the other day, and I want to be there to turn it on, because it often makes a lot of smoke when you turn it on the first time. But it allows you to do really tall ones. It can do a 5.5-inch Eiffel Tower. And it does it basically by using light-sensitive plastic. Now, why do I suggest that to you? Because very often we get new technologies way before we understand what the implication. I'm on a board with Eric Schmidt. When Google came out, they did not suggest that it would be used as a search engine. They thought it would be a background index, but not a search engine. And then suddenly they found the box that if you typed it, got you places. I think a lot of the technologies that we're seeing now, whether they be our tablets, whether they be 3D printers and the like, are going to allow us to change behavior. I don't think we want to abandon what we're doing to do that. But I think we want to realize that we're in an amazingly interesting time, and we're going to leverage ways to do it. Nothing to me is more interesting if I want to leverage something than at the end of the day to take a look at learning. I think what we as a society, as American society, must be is a learning society. So no matter who wins in the fall election, it's enormously important that we realize that all around the world people are now really hungry to learn. Are learning online, are learning fast online, are getting literally parallel, if not equal, competencies to us, and will compete with us at a distance and the like. We need to, as a society, re-embrace how we become learners. And to me, that learning is not just what you do at the beginning of your career, but we do all the way through, including when you become an alpha boomer or beyond in that process. So I hope I've stimulated a little bit of that. Continue to do what you do. I want my stocks and my companies to be well supervised, well audited, and looked at from a competency point of view. And thank you much as a fellow learning professional. Take care.